Hi, it's Ray here, and it's great to see you. It's the perfect day for a fireside chat, since I'd rather be cozy by the fire than braving the snowstorm that blew in overnight. Today I want to move away from the previous chats about technology to technique, and I want to tell you about the strangest example of synchronicity ever to arise from a moment that passed before my camera. It's often said that every picture tells a story, or it's worth 1,000 words, and sometimes a hidden tale lurks behind the image. Before I continue, look at this photo. Pause the video if you need more time. What story have you built around it? What does it say to you? What questions does it beg? Because, for better or worse, in this video, I'm going to tell the story that led to the making of the Bible Society and the life it took on afterwards. On the morning of the day I took the picture in 1981, I decided to make like the Invisible Man. I'd read about Henri Cartier-Bresson's decisive moment and mastered at least the first part of the F8 and Be There creed. So the plan, such as it was to remain alert, keep my eyes open while attempting to blend into the crowd. With the role of Panatomic X, one of the finest black and white films Kodak ever produced, loaded in my newly purchased Nikon FM camera, fitted with 50mm f1.8 Series E lens, I wandered over to my friend Brian Beard's house. After the usual pot of tea, we jumped on a bus, spending the long ride from White Rock to Vancouver, reviewing our recent climbing experiences. In particular, a winter climb of frozen Shannon Falls near Squamish, from which we were lucky to escape with our lives. Those kinds of near-death climbing experiences tend to create deep bonds, and Brian and I were, I guess you could say, soul brothers. And if you'll bear with me, there's another incidental but no less fluky story associated with this. On the day of the waterfall climb, I left my camera at home. I'm not sure I regretted that decision really, since the last thing we needed on the tottering tower of rotten ice was the distraction of hero shots. We very nearly came to grief. Though we did have the help of a full moon, it was a long hike back to the boulder-strewn base of the falls in the dark, where we'd left some extra gear. On the top of my backpack, we discovered a film canister containing a roll of exposed film, alongside with an address torn off the top of a bank check. This photo, and more, were shot by a guy named Randy Hunt, a police crime scene photographer it turned out. You might say he photographed the scene of the crime, or disaster as it nearly was. In the end, we went over to his darkroom to have the film developed. The contact sheet from my Vancouver shoot reveals just 10 images shot that day. Brian and I walked on Granville Street, Vancouver's Theatre Row, where I exposed a few frames, including shots of a busking jazz trio. Then we moved on to Chinatown, where I recorded fish merchants at work, and an apothecary who wasn't too happy to have me poking my camera in his door. Between these two locations, there's a single frame, the 7th exposure on the roll, taken at the intersection of Dunsmuir and Richard Streets. Brian and I were chatting as we waited for the walk signal, and when I looked forward, there was the decisive moment. I used the measurements on the focus ring to quickly focus, and then I pressed the shutter, assuming that the exposure would be similar to the last ones. It was a shot from the hip. Remember when you had to make all those decisions and execute them manually? Now it's all program and be there. And how did I pull this off without eye autofocus? 10 years later, I entered the photo in the juried show called Vancouver's Vancouver, which ran August the 15th to September 15th, 1991. The show was organized by Urban Photographic Projects. These shows, and I'd seen an earlier project in Toronto, turned parts of chosen cities into open-air galleries with shops hosting images in their windows. The Bible Society, paired with another one of my photos featuring a younger, though no less hirsute chap emerging from the crest of a blooming cherry tree, was hosted in a women's fashion shop on trendy Robson Street. The next part of the tale was relayed to me by the shop owner. As she told it, a group of women had gathered in front of the store window, looking at the photos, when one of them glanced sideways. "It's him!" She pointed to a man who was strolling up the street, who was understandably startled. Had he been mistaken for a thief? "It's you, here in this picture," the woman told him. A few days later, the proprietor of the shop handed me a business card, Robert Easton, the Henry Higgins of Hollywood, after the professor of phonetics in My Fair Lady. Easton, it turned out, was a dialect coach to the stars. His ads in industry magazines, which I stumbled on afterwards through a friend who works as a location scout and manager, list every actor under the sun as clients. I phoned him. On that day, in 1981, he recalled he was in Vancouver working on a film and had just wandered along Richard Street visiting his favorite antiquarian bookstore. Since he avidly collected rare books, particularly relating to dialects and culture. When his library nearly overwhelmed his Hollywood home, to house the collection, he had built a library over former tennis courts on his property. I've since seen photos and video of his collection, and I'll post those along with other interviews and whatnot in the details below. It's estimated at 500,000 volumes. He didn't remember seeing me and my camera. That suit, one of his favorites, bought in Miami, Florida during another film production, he remembered. Another movie had brought him back to Vancouver during the summer of 1991. Serendipity led him to Robson Street and that strange welcome that awaited him. The first thing he asked me was, "Are you a reader?" "Yes." "And who is my favorite author?" I'd have to say Aldous Huxley. And that would still be my answer today. The British novelist, essayist, spiritual philosopher, and psychedelic explorer was famous for his prescient story In a Dystopian Brave New World, published in 1931. But he spent the final third of his life, beginning in 1937, in California, working as a screenwriter. Easton, it turned out, and Huxley were friends. Huxley owned a mansion on Mulholland Highway right beneath the first O in the Hollywood sign. The 4,000 square foot house sold for $4.3 million in 2018 to Zelda Williams, daughter of the late great Robin Williams. Incidentally, the Huxley's first house in the neighborhood on Deronda Drive was razed by the 1961 bushfires that ran through the Hollywood Hills. He lost most of his papers, personal effects, everything, saving only the manuscript for Island, his last novel. Robert and his wife June Easton, née Grinstead, an actress, lived in somewhat more modest circumstances in Toluca Lake, 5 miles or 8 kilometers down the highway, passing Warner Brothers and Universal Studios along the way. I can imagine that was a pretty heady time. Easton spent plenty of time on camera, in television and in feature films as well. He landed his first bit part in a Hollywood film in 1949 as a parking valet in the crime thriller Undertow, with Rock Hudson as a detective. Film credits include Paint Your Wagon, Pete's Dragon, Pet Sematary 2, Primary Colors, and he played a Klingon judge in Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country in 1991, the year of our chance meeting. He had TV roles in The Beverly Hillbillies, Get Smart, The Mod Squad, The Saint, Rawhide, Wagon Train, The Lucy Show, The Munsters, and countless other shows, all the shows I grew up with. In his youth, Easton suffered a terrible stutter. He was a native of Milwaukee, but learned that emulating a slow southern accent that he heard when he was living in Texas, that he could overcome the impediment. As a result, he was typecast as a southern hayseed, so he set out to learn more dialects, ultimately leading to him teaching others. On a sojourn with June in her native birthplace, he studied phonetics at University College London, and at the same time he acted in several films, including The War Lover, made in 1962, alongside Steve McQueen. Meanwhile, as a voice coach, he helped Forrest Whitaker's performance as Idi Amin in The Last King of Scotland. Whitaker won a Best Actor for that. He taught Arnold Schwarzenegger a Russian accent in Red Heat. He taught Robert Duvall a Virginian accent for the role of a Confederate commander in the 2003 film Gods and Generals. That was awesome. He coached Gregory Peck as the Nazi concentration camp Dr. Joseph Mengele in Boys from Brazil. Then as Abraham Lincoln in the television miniseries The Blue and the Gray. He taught Ben Kingsley, the New York mobster brogue he used for Bugsy, and he helped Al Pacino sound like a Cuban in Scarface. He worked with Sir Laurence Olivier when he played a Detroit car company boss in The Betsy. And he taught Japanese actress Yoko Shimada, who spoke not a word of English, for her English language performance in the miniseries Shogun, 1980. Remember that one? She won a Golden Globe Award for that. As I said, there were literally hundreds more famous names credited on his CV. We had a lot in common, it turned out, since my father was an entertainer in the vaudevillian tradition. And I'd recently had my 5 seconds, or was it milliseconds, of Hollywood fame as a background actor in a Disney film. We talked at length about politics, culture, the arts, of course. He was an astute and very eloquent guy, and very busy. He taught elocution to business people and, in fact, anyone who wanted to sound more articulate. And he served on the board of the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences, who present the Emmy Awards. There's really not enough room on this disc to list all his accomplishments. Our written correspondence came by way of June, who wrote several cordial letters, the first acknowledging receipt of the framed Vancouver's Vancouver Show poster featuring the Bible Society photo.
Dear Raymond, just love the photo. It's just too bad that my husband looks more like 80 than 60. He will wear such a long beard.
I sent that down to them. June was wonderful. Sadly, she died from complications of lupus in 2005. Robert died in December 2011 at 81. I was awarded second prize by the Vancouver's Vancouver jury for another photograph shot from the top of Vancouver's Pacific National Exhibition wooden roller coaster. But it was the Bible Society as no other photograph I've made. It was so spontaneous in the original execution and ultimately surprising in the story it created for itself. I think this story is an illustration of where creative endeavors of any kind can lead. A couple of footnotes. I just bought a like-new Nikon FM camera which came with the same 50mm E-series lens, just like the one used to make this and thousands more of my 1980s photos. Maybe I'm hoping it'll lead to more chance opportunities like this. While I've been making this video, it's focused my thoughts, often at 3 a.m., on how our lives are affected, directed even by the culture we grow up in, and of course the cultural icons that, through their creativity, influence society as a whole. In one sense, their works are part of a continuum that transcends the individual creator. Hollywood movies, TV shows, philosophers and storytellers like Aldous Huxley, photographs that have come to define our histories. And then I recall the experience on that frozen waterfall that began with terror and ended in a kind of calm, when I came to see the insignificance of my existence within the vast, dangerous beauty of nature, and that survival was up to me, and of course my friend, whose presence on the other end of the rope served as a promise to take the next unsure step into the unknown. It was the only way forward. Perhaps these musings might be subjects for another chat. Now that you know these background details, has the meaning you attach to the photo been devalued in any way, or have these words enhanced the visual story? Would you rather I'd left you with your own interpretation? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please subscribe and hit that bell to be notified when I publish new content. Meanwhile, maybe check out more of the fireside chats right here. Take care of yourselves. We'll see you later.